Hey, welcome to programming. Now it is time for us to work on creating your first program. Now, a few things about this. There's a lot of sequential steps that we'll go through on a regular basis. A lot of steps you'll be repeating over and over, so you will get the hang of it with practice. And that's really something that's going to be important here, is that you will practice and do lots of repetitive code exercises so that you have the lessons ingrained, so it becomes second nature and it will make sense. Now let's step back a moment there and talk a little bit about what programming is. We are writing instructions to give it to the computer so that it can show us something on screen. That's our ultimate goal that we'll be working on throughout the semester, is we will be using code to display content on screen and then make that content interactive so that we can work with it either through the mouse or keyboard input. So that's where we'll be working to. But right now we're going to start with the very basics. So I've launched processing after a successful download, and every time you launch processing, it creates a basic sketch. So that is the term that processing uses to describe what a program is. And they use the word sketch because the inventors of, or creators of, processing believe that programming should be accessible to creatives. It shouldn't be only for people who go and study computer science. So processing really is a programming language that is designed for artists and designers and other people who want to be able to create something expressive through code. So code does not have to be scary. Code should be fun, it should be exciting, and you should be able to create with it. Working on computers sometimes do crash. So the first thing that we should do each time when we create a new sketch is save that sketch. So I am going to take the sketch that I have created and I am going to save it. You can go under the File pull-down menu and choose Save, and when you do that, it will by default want to put it into the processing folder. So this folder was created when you installed the program. I'm going to put it on the desktop so it's easier for us to work with it here in class. So I am asking that you name your sketch with your first name, last name, initials, and then the title of what the sketch is. And this is going to be Smiley. So I'm going to save mine on the desktop. So when I save it, we will see that it didn't save a file, but instead it saved a folder. If I look at this folder, I will see inside that folder is a file. The file and folder have the same name, but the file inside has a file type extension on it of .pde. So that is a processing document extension or development environment PDE. So that is how all of your files should look. It's critical. I can't now go back. If I go and change the name of this file or change the name of the folder that holds that file, then it will give me an error message when I try and open it or run my sketch. So if I decide I need to rename it because I didn't name it how I wanted to, I need to make sure that I rename the folder and rename the primary sketch file inside that folder. So now that it has been named, it's been saved, it's ready for me to do something. So I can now start typing in instructions into the browser, or not the browser, into the code editor here to make things happen. So when I do that, I could type in something, but before I do that, I'll just hit run and we'll see what the sketch does when I run it. And having run it, it now opens up this document window. This is my program that's running. We'll see that it is currently running. I can stop it and that will go away. I'm just going to leave this window up. I'm going to move this window over here a little bit because right now the default size the sketch will come up is 200 pixels by 200 pixels in size. So we need to modify that a little bit. And one of the ways that we can do that is we can type in size. And now I can enter in a number. The number that I'm entering in here is in pixels. So it's how many pixels large I want it to be. Now when I do that, if I hit run again, and this time the sketch is bigger. So now I have my sketch. I have the instructions here of how big I wanted it to be. Now, a few things to notice here is I typed in a command, I have parentheses, and then I put parameters inside those parentheses. And we'll notice that this is wider than it is tall, and that corresponds to, I've put a number here that represents my width, and I have a number here that represents the height. Also notice I put a space here. One thing about processing, it does not care about white space. It's also like writing code in JavaScript. White space is irrelevant. The white space makes the code human readable, but the computer doesn't care. So you can be lazy while you're typing and not put in white space, or you can put it in so your code looks clean and is easier to read. It's entirely up to you. And when I get to the end of a line, I indicate that by using a semicolon. So now if I want to do another line of code here, I can then set the background color that I'm working with. So we can specify color using any, not any, but a number of different methods of specifying color, and we can represent that. So now if I were to say 0, like this, background 0, and I'm just going to back up for a moment, and you'll notice down at the bottom of the screen it's giving me red, and it's telling me, hey, I think you're missing something here. When I was here, it tells me the function background, and we'll talk what that word function means in a moment, expects parameters like int. Well, that int would be a number, and then that number that I could put in here, I could put in a value of, say, 0. And then with a semicolon, click play, and this time we see it comes up with black. Now if I change that number and say, put it to 255, we'll see that now it's filled with white. What's happening here is we are referencing grayscale color when we only put in one value. This value, 0 to 255, is using 8-bit color and it's grayscale. Now if we wanted to specify more colors, so if I said 255, 0, 0, notice I didn't use spaces that time. I could even just use one space if I wanted. It's all fine, it's going to work, but now 255 is electric red because what is happening here is I am using red, green, and blue values. So if you're used to mixing RGB or red, green, and blue color values inside a program such as Photoshop, then you're comfortable using those values. So we can also reference using hexadecimal value color notation, and if we want some help figuring out how to establish what our colors are, I can go under my tool pull-down menu and you'll see I have an option called color selector. And when I do that, it pulls up this little color window and I can choose a color. Now I can go and you see how all the values are changing. So the red, green, and blue values are changing as it's helping me come up with a color. I'll just choose a nice gentle orange color. And if I choose copy, it's not going to copy the RGB value, but instead it's going to copy my hex color value here of the pound F5955E. And now if I put that value in over here, pasting that in and run my sketch, we'll see this time it comes up with orange and provides that. So I'm just going to leave this color window over here because then we will be using it a little bit more later as we come up with some other colors in our project for our sketch. So I've declared the size of my project. I've declared a background color for my project, but there's not a lot of other stuff going on. But if we remember, it said the word function. So we want to go into that here in a little bit. And now let's say something like, oh, I don't know, I want to draw a circle. And I want to put that circle in the middle of my screen. So if I go under circle, we'll see down at the bottom it says expects parameters like circle, float, float, float. You're like, some values here. So I'm going to put a value in and let's see what happens if I go 0, 0, and we'll just put in a value of 300. So now when I do that and run my program, we'll see that it put a circle with its center point in the top left corner, and that circle is a radius of 150. Because if I were to now move this over a little bit, move that to say 150, see the whole circle fits on screen. Now if we remember, our project is going to be 600 or 800 pixels wide. So now I could fit 2 circles and 2/3 of another circle. So if I experiment with that, and let's try that again and see what happens. Circle, this time instead of at 150, we'll add another 300 onto that. Let's just go at 450, 0, comma, and then 300. So we'll make it the same size. Now when I run my sketch, we'll see now I have 2 circles. So what's happening is the computer is executing these lines of code in the order that they occur. So that is an important thing to always remember when we're coding, is that computers execute code in line order. So the order that you provide are the orders that they will do those instructions. So sometimes you will try and draw one object on top of another, and then you won't see it because one is covering the other, and you have the order in which you're drawing those objects flipped. Now we'll also notice these objects started out, they have a default color of white. Now we're going to try something else. We're going to put in the word rect, and we'll see the function rect expects parameters like float, 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 float. So if we try and deduce from what we did on the circle here, the circle took 3 because the circle just has a single value. The height and width are the same, so we only need 3 values. But a rectangle, if I wanted to make it a square, I would provide the same width and height to it. But if we're going to go put something on screen, I'll just say let's go at 100 here, just for kicks. And we'll go down to 400. And let's put in a value of, if I go 200, 200. Now I've created what we will see is a square, and it dumped down here at the bottom. Now watch what happens. We go back and we just go 0, 0. Now remember the circle, its middle showed up at 0, 0 when I did that. Now the square, its top left corner does. So by default, the drawing mode for circles and ellipses is they draw, ellipses being ovals, which we'll look at that in a little bit. The coordinates, as we put them on screen, show up from their middles. Squares use their top left corner as their origin or registration point. So it's important that we just remember that when we're working with these objects, that circles and ellipses behave differently than rectangles and squares. So we have to know that while we're working with them. Now notice when you type things, it underlines it in red until you've provided what it wants. Now we'll see the function ellipse expects parameters float, 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 meaning it wants 4 values. So if I were to say 0, and then we'll go, it's 600 tall, so I'm going to try 300, being what should be the middle. And let's see, is it height width or width height? Let's find out. So when I hit run, okay. So now we'll see that its middle is at 0 here. And then it seems that it's narrower than it is tall. So I used large enough values that I could figure out a difference between them. And we can see that the center point of this corresponds to the middle of the screen. So if I were to say something like 400 here, remembering that our whole sketch is 800 tall, so 400 would be the middle horizontally, 300 is the middle vertically. And now we can see that it drew that ellipse in the middle of the screen. So its center point is right here. And we have a width of 100 and a height of 200. So what we're learning here is we start our registration in the top left corner. That is 0, 0. As we work across, we're working over to 800, the width of our sketch, and we're working down to 600. That is the height of our sketch. So now we can see how these values are impacting what we're doing. Now you may be thinking to yourself, okay, that's fine and good, but a bunch of white objects, boring. Let's add some color in here. Let's do something with this to make it a little bit more interesting. So if we want to add in color, it's going to be similar to what we did with the background, but what we need to do is use a fill statement. So now when I choose fill, I'm going to go find a color. Yeah, I like that color. We'll just copy that. And you'll see by leaving that color selector up and not closing it out, we can just keep going back to it while we're working. So now I run my sketch again and let's see what happens. Well, notice that the first circle is filled with white. Second circle after that fill statement is now filled with this kind of pinkish color, as well as the rectangle and the ellipse. So what happens is, once we establish a fill color, everything will remain that fill color until we have another fill statement. So now if I say fill, let's go find a different color. This time we'll go grab that turquoise color because I can. And now when I run this, let's see what happens. We'll see that, so we have white, pink, turquoise, or teal. So we're able to set the colors. Now, both the rectangle and the ellipse are both teal because after this fill statement, I don't make another declaration of color. So then they stay that color. Now, little bit of business here. As we've been working, as I've been writing the code, one thing that has happened is we've added lines of code. There is not an autosave taking effect here. So it's important as I'm working to save periodically. It doesn't crash a lot, but you don't want to spend a couple hours coding and then have it crash and then lose everything that you've done. So it's a good idea to either use the key command to save, which is Command or Control S, Mac or Windows, or go under the File pull-down menu and choose Save. Don't keep doing Save As. That'll just make new folders each time you do that, and there's really no need to go about that. So now we've been able to set the size of our program. We've declared a background color, we've drawn a bunch of objects, and we've been able to fill them all with different colors. So this is a good start on getting into coding and programming. I do want to circle back, and I mentioned that I would talk about functions. So each one of these words that shows up in blue, these are functions or sets of instructions that are part of the language. As we advance in our programming skills, you will be writing your own functions. So you won't just be using the functions that come with the processing language, but instead you will create your own custom functions to do the work that you need done. And that becomes really exciting when you are able to start adding to the complexity of your program with functions that you are creating instead of using pre-built functions that are baked into the language. Now, if you're wondering, it's like, okay, how do I know what function to use, what word to use, what to type while I'm doing this? One thing that I do when I am working is I always will have the processing website up. I will be open to the reference tab on it, and I will be continually referencing all of these pieces of code reference. Bad sentence, 2 references, but we'll get over it. So if we use these, we can create things. Now you'll notice under primitives here, we're doing 2D primitives because I use circle. So if I click on circle, we'll see it gives me information. If I want to draw a circle, 56, 46, 55, we'll see that it's X, Y, and extent, which is referencing the width or height or diameter of that circle. So now we can see how it shows us these parameters, tells us what they mean. Now if I click over here related to it, ellipse, okay, great. So now ellipse comes up and we see that it says A, B, C, D, and then that's A is the X, B is the Y, then we have width, then we have height. So X, Y, width, height are the 4 values that ellipse is expecting. If I go back and choose something like rectangle, we'll see the same sort of thing. We also have an option to round the corners if we provide other values into it, but primarily when we're working, we'll just use standard rectangles with A, B, C, D, which would be X, Y, width, and height as the 4 values that we are putting into it. So using the reference is going to help us to be able to write our code. I don't expect that you're going to have everything that is here memorized. I don't. But I do expect that you will go on to the processing website and use the language reference, because this is how you're able to create more complex projects.